Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from and what time it is right now. That's how YouTube keeps sending you more chilling stories like this. And now, let the night begin with 8 creepy small-town horror stories story. From the Welcome Committee. I found my grandmother's keys in a manila envelope that arrived 3 days after her funeral. No note, no explanation. Just keys and an address in Millbrook, Vermont, a town I'd never heard her mention once in 27 years. The house sat at the end of Birch Lane, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that looked like it had been lifted from a postcard. I pulled into the gravel driveway just after noon on a Saturday in late September, and before I'd even turned off the engine, I saw them. 5 people standing on the sidewalk, smiling, waving. A woman in her 60s approached first, carrying a pie in oven-mitted hands. "Vanessa," she called out like we were old friends. "We've been expecting you." I stepped out of the car slowly. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" "Oh, don't be silly. I'm Dorothy. I live right across the street." She gestured to a yellow house with white trim. "We all knew you'd be coming. Your grandmother told us so much about you." That should have been my first warning. My grandmother had been estranged from her family for decades. We'd only reconnected in the last 2 years of her life, and even then, she'd been careful never to mention where she'd grown up. The others introduced themselves in rapid succession. Harold from next door, Margaret and Bill from down the street, a younger man named Peter who said he ran the general store on Main. They all knew my name. They all acted like my arrival was the most natural thing in the world. "You must be exhausted from the drive," Dorothy said. "I'll just leave this pie on the porch. It's apple. Your favorite, isn't it?" I hadn't told anyone I was coming. I'd barely decided myself until that morning. "Thank you," I managed. "That's very kind." They lingered while I unloaded my car, offering help I didn't need, asking questions that felt slightly too personal. What did I do for work? Was I planning to stay? Which bedroom would I take? That last question came from Harold, and something about the way he asked it made my skin prickle. "I haven't really thought about it yet," I said. "Oh, you'll want the one on the 2nd floor facing the garden," Margaret said with absolute certainty. "That's the nicest room. Best light." I thanked them again and carried my bags inside, grateful when they finally dispersed. The house was exactly as I'd expected from a woman in her 80s. Floral wallpaper, lace curtains, furniture that predated my birth. Everything was clean though, dust-free, like someone had been maintaining it. I chose the bedroom facing the garden mostly because it had an attached bathroom. That night, I sat by the window with a book, too wired to sleep. The garden below was overgrown but charming in a wild way. Beyond it, a wall of dark trees marked the edge of someone else's property. Around 10, I saw Dorothy standing in her front yard, looking directly up at my window. When she saw me notice her, she waved. I waved back uncertainly and closed the curtains. The next morning, I found a basket of muffins on the porch. Blueberry. The note read, "Thought you might need breakfast. Welcome home. Margaret." Welcome home. Not welcome to Millbrook. Home. Over the next week, the visitors kept coming, always with food, always with that same warm, knowing friendliness. They mentioned things I'd never told them. That I worked in graphic design, that I'd broken up with my boyfriend 3 months ago, that I was considering a career change. When I asked how they knew, they'd smile and say something vague about small-town gossip or my grandmother having been a talker. But my grandmother hadn't been a talker, especially not about me. On my 8th night in the house, I stayed up late working on a client project. Around 2 in the morning, I heard voices outside. Soft, conversational. I went to the window and looked down. 4 people stood in the garden looking up at the house. I recognized Harold and Peter. The other two were strangers. They weren't doing anything threatening, just standing there talking in low tones. But something about the scene made my chest tighten. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding, and waited for them to leave. They didn't. At 3:30, they were still there. I checked again at 4. They were gone. The next morning, Dorothy knocked on my door with fresh bread. "You were up late," she said pleasantly. "Burning the midnight oil?" My throat went dry. "How did you know that?" "Oh, we could see your light on," she smiled. "You work too hard, dear. You should get more rest." After she left, I walked around the entire house, checking every window, every angle. There was no possible way she could have seen my bedroom light from her house. The angle was wrong. Trees blocked the view. I started paying attention after that. Really paying attention. Margaret mentioned that I'd had cereal for breakfast before I'd taken the trash out. Bill commented on the book I was reading before I'd left the house with it. Peter at the general store asked if I'd enjoyed the movie I'd watched the night before. A movie I'd streamed on my laptop in my locked bedroom with the curtains closed. I stopped answering the door. I kept the curtains drawn constantly. I started changing my routine, doing things at random times, trying to become unpredictable. It didn't matter. They always knew. 2 weeks in, I found the first camera. It was in the smoke detector in the hallway, tiny and sophisticated. Then I found the one in the living room light fixture, the one behind the bathroom mirror, the one in the air vent above my bed. I counted 11 total. I packed a bag and went straight to the sheriff's office. The deputy on duty was a friendly woman in her 40s who listened to my story with a patient expression. "Those aren't cameras, sweetheart," she said when I finished. "Those are carbon monoxide detectors. Your grandmother had them installed 2 years ago. I know what a camera looks like. Sometimes when we're stressed, we see things that aren't there." She leaned forward, her voice gentle. Moving into a deceased relative's home can be disorienting, especially when you're isolated. "Have you been sleeping?" I left without another word. That night, I went through my grandmother's belongings more carefully. In the back of her bedroom closet, behind a false panel I almost missed, I found them. Journals, dozens of them spanning 40 years. I started with the most recent one. The entries were sparse, written in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. Most were mundane observations about weather and meals, but scattered throughout were other things. Fragmentary. Disturbing. "They're watching again. Found another one behind the bookshelf. I've stopped trying to remove them, they just come back. 23 years, still can't leave." I flipped back further to journals from decades earlier when her handwriting was steadier. I thought I could escape by not having children here. I thought if I moved away, married elsewhere, kept Vanessa's existence secret, she'd be free. But they always knew. They were always waiting. My hands started shaking. The agreement was made long before I was born. Every woman in the Ashford line, they need us here. They need to know where we are, what we're doing, who we're becoming. They say it's protection, they say it's tradition, but I know what it really is. I know what happens if we try to run. The final entry in the last journal was dated 2 days before she died. "Vanessa will come. I've tried to warn her without saying it directly. They're always listening. But she's stubborn like her mother. When she arrives, they'll be ready. They'll make her feel welcome. They'll make her feel watched. And when she's frightened enough, when she's desperate enough to understand, she'll find these journals. She'll learn what I learned, what my mother learned, what every Ashford woman has learned." Below that, in letters that looked pressed so hard they nearly tore the paper, "There is no leaving Millbrook. There is only waiting for the next generation." I read until sunrise. By the time I finished, I understood why my grandmother had never spoken about this place. why she'd moved across the country, why she'd kept me secret for so long, and I understood that it hadn't mattered. They'd been waiting anyway. I left that morning with nothing but my car keys and wallet. I didn't pack. I didn't say goodbye, I just drove. I made it 16 miles before my engine died on an empty stretch of road surrounded by forest. No cell service, no other cars. I waited 4 hours before a truck finally appeared. It was Harold. "Having car trouble, Vanessa?" he asked, like he'd expected to find me there, like he'd known exactly where I'd be. He drove me back to Millbrook, back to the house on Birch Lane. He didn't say much during the drive, just hummed along to the radio and smiled. When we pulled into the driveway, Dorothy was already standing on the porch with fresh lemonade. That was 3 months ago. I've stopped trying to leave. I've stopped covering the cameras. I've stopped closing the curtains at night. Everyone in town still greets me like an old friend. They still know what I'm doing before I do it. They still watch with those patient, knowing smiles. Sometimes I think about my grandmother spending 40 years trying to escape before finally dying in a hospital 2 states away, only for her body to be buried right back here in the Millbrook Cemetery like she'd never left at all. I wonder if she knew. I wonder if she understood that geography doesn't matter when you're part of something this old, this patient, this permanent. I'm starting to understand now. And late at night when I can't sleep, I think about the question I haven't dared to ask, the one my grandmother's journals never answered. What are they waiting for? What happens when the watching finally ends? Story 2, The House That Stayed Empty. The rental listing called it charming and full of character, which should have been my first clue. In my experience, those words usually meant small and falling apart, but the price was absurdly low, less than half what I'd budgeted. And the photos showed a perfectly decent 2-bedroom house with original hardwood floors and a big backyard. For a first-year teacher in a rural district, it seemed like a miracle. The landlord, Mr. Cowan, met me outside on a gray afternoon in August. He was probably 70, with the kind of weathered face that comes from a lifetime of outdoor work. He shook my hand firmly and said he was glad to have found a tenant. "Been empty a while?" I asked as he unlocked the front door. "Bit of time, yes." He pushed the door open. "Last renter left pretty sudden, but the house is sound. No problems with the bones of it." The interior was exactly as advertised, clean, if a bit dated. The furniture was included, another selling point, and while it wasn't my style, it was functional. I signed the lease that afternoon. Moving in took less than a day. I didn't have much, and the house came furnished, so by evening I was unpacked and sitting on the porch with a beer, watching the sun set behind the trees that lined the back of the property. That's when I met Helen. She emerged from the house next door slowly, leaning on a cane, and made her way across the lawn that separated our properties. She was ancient, probably mid-80s, with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and eyes that studied me with uncomfortable intensity. "You're the new teacher," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am, Tyler Brennan. I'll be teaching history at the high school." She nodded slowly, still looking at me in that strange way. Not quite at my face, but slightly to the left of it, like she was looking at someone standing beside me. "How long you planning to stay?" "Well, I signed a year lease, but hopefully longer. I like it here." Her expression didn't change. "People usually don't stay long in that house." Mr. Cowan mentioned the last tenant left suddenly. "They all do." She turned to go, then paused. "Bit of advice. Don't go into the basement after dark, and if you hear things at night, don't go looking for the source. Some things are better left alone." She walked away before I could respond. I laughed it off. Every small town had its eccentrics, right? The creepy neighbor was basically a cliché. But that night, lying in the unfamiliar bedroom with moonlight streaming through the curtains I hadn't gotten around to replacing, I found myself thinking about what she'd said. Don't go looking for the source. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it. Footsteps, clear, distinct, coming from somewhere below me, not the basement. These sounded like they were on the first floor. Someone walking slowly from the living room toward the kitchen. I sat up, listening. My phone was charging across the room. The baseball bat I'd brought, a gift from my overprotective father, was in the closet. The footsteps stopped. I waited, heart hammering, for 5 full minutes, nothing. Finally, I got up, grabbed the bat, and crept downstairs. Every light was off just as I'd left them. The doors were locked, windows secure. I checked every room, every closet, every space big enough to hide a person. Nothing. I went back to bed but didn't sleep. The next morning, I asked the teacher in the classroom next to mine about the house. Her name was Madison, and she'd grown up in the area. "Oh, the Hebert place," she said, recognition flashing across her face. "Yeah, that house has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" She hesitated. "Nothing specific, just people don't tend to stay there long. I think there was a family there in the 90s, and before that, some college student. They all moved out pretty quick." "Why?" "No one really talks about it. Small town, you know. People get superstitious." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it's nothing. Probably just an old house with old house sounds." But she wouldn't meet my gaze when she said it. The footsteps came again the next night, and the night after that, always around 2 in the morning, always the same path, living room to kitchen. I started staying up to catch them. The moment I heard the first step, I'd rush downstairs with my phone flashlight blazing, but I never found anything. The sounds would stop the second I reached the stairs. After a week of this, I was exhausted and frustrated. I set up my laptop in the living room before bed, webcam recording pointed at the hallway where the footsteps seemed to travel. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At 2:07 a.m., my recording showed the empty hallway, nothing moving, nothing visible. But the audio picked up the footsteps perfectly. Slow, deliberate, getting closer to the camera. Then they stopped, and for 3 seconds the image flickered. When it stabilized, I could see something that made my blood freeze, a shadow on the wall, human-shaped, standing directly in front of the camera. But there was nothing there to cast it. I watched the shadow remain motionless for nearly a minute. Then it moved, walking backward down the hallway, and disappeared around the corner toward the kitchen. I played it back 6 times, telling myself there had to be an explanation. A trick of the light, a glitch in the recording. Something. That afternoon, I worked up the courage to explore the basement. It was unfinished, with stone walls and a dirt floor. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, operated by a pull chain at the bottom of the stairs. The space smelled like damp earth and old wood. I didn't find anything unusual at first. Some old paint cans, a broken chair, boxes of junk left behind by previous tenants. Then I noticed the crawl space. It was in the far corner, a small opening about 3 feet high, covered by a piece of plywood that didn't quite fit. I almost missed it entirely. I should have left it alone. Helen's warning echoed in my head, but I was tired of being scared in my own house. I needed answers. I moved the plywood aside and shined my phone light into the crawl space. The beam illuminated a space about 8 feet deep. Dirt floor, stone walls, and at the far end, a metal box. It took me 10 minutes to work up the nerve to crawl in and get it. The box was old, the kind of fireproof safe people kept important documents in. It wasn't locked. Inside, I found photographs, dozens of them. They were all of the house, different angles, different times of day, different seasons. Some were clearly very old, faded and yellowed. Others were more recent, printed on modern photo paper. But they all had one thing in common. In every single photograph, there was a figure in one of the windows. Sometimes it was just a silhouette. Sometimes it was more distinct, a pale face half hidden by curtains. In one photo from what looked like the 1970s, a woman stood in the upstairs bedroom window staring directly at the camera. Her face was blurred, but her posture suggested she'd been there a long time. I spread the photos out on the basement floor, hands shaking. The figure appeared in different windows in different photos, but it was always there, always watching. Beneath the photographs, I found a stack of letters. They were addressed to the property owner, not Mr. Cowan, but someone named Douglas Hebert. The dates ranged from 1962 to 1993. They were all from former tenants. The first one, dated July 1962, was polite but firm. "I appreciate the opportunity to rent your property, but I'm afraid I need to terminate my lease early. The house doesn't suit my needs after all." The second, dated March 1968. "I don't know what you're trying to pull, but I'm not staying in that house another night. You can keep my deposit, I don't care." The third, dated November 1974. "I'm writing to inform you that I've moved out of the property at 47 Maple Road. I will not be providing a forwarding address, and I ask that you not attempt to contact me. What you failed to disclose about the house is unconscionable." They continued in that vein, growing more distressed and less coherent as the dates progressed. The last one, dated August 1993, was barely legible. "It won't stop watching. I can't sleep, I can't stay. Something is wrong with that house, something has always been wrong." I sat in that basement for a long time, surrounded by evidence that I wasn't the first person to experience something wrong in this house. That dozens of people over decades had felt it, seen it, and run from it. And I realized something else. In all those letters, in all those complaints, not one person had described what they'd experienced. They all danced around it, used vague language, refused to say it directly, like they were afraid that naming it would make it real. I put everything back in the box and crawled out of the crawl space. As I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, I glanced at the basement stairs. Someone was standing at the top, silhouette only, backlit by the light from the kitchen, completely motionless. I blinked, and it was gone. I sold most of my belongings and moved out that weekend. Mr. Cowan didn't argue when I broke the lease. He just nodded, took the keys, and said he hoped I'd find somewhere more suitable. I asked him point blank why he kept renting that house when he knew what happened to the tenants. He looked at me with tired eyes and said, "Someone has to live there. It gets worse when it's empty." I didn't ask what he meant. I'm in a new apartment now, 40 miles away. Smaller, more expensive. But the walls are thin and I can hear my neighbors on both sides, and that's comforting in a way I never expected. Sometimes, though, late at night, I think about that house, about all the photographs, about the figure that appeared in every window decade after decade, waiting for whoever was inside. And I think about what Helen said. Some things are better left alone. She was right. I just wish I'd listened before I knew what she meant. Story 3, the night the sirens didn't sound. The alternator went out just before sunset. I'd been driving through Nebraska for 8 hours, trying to make it to Denver before midnight, when my dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree and the engine started making a sound like a dying animal. I coasted into the first town I saw. Barely a town really, just a cluster of buildings hugging a rural highway, and rolled into a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. The mechanic was a guy in his 50s with grease-stained hands and a skeptical expression. He looked under the hood for maybe 30 seconds before delivering the bad news. "Alternator's shot. I can fix it, but I don't have the part here. Won't come in until tomorrow morning." I checked my phone. No service, of course. Is there a hotel nearby? He pointed down the road. Maple Lodge, only place in town. Claire will set you up. The Maple Lodge was exactly what I expected. A 2-story motel with 12 rooms and a flickering vacancy sign. The woman at the desk, presumably Claire, was pleasant enough. She took my cash, handed me a key attached to a plastic diamond-shaped tag, and told me the diner across the street was open until 9 if I needed dinner. Quiet town, I said, making conversation. Very, she agreed with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I grabbed fast food from the diner, a burger that was better than it had any right to be, and settled into my room. It was clean but dated, with a TV that only picked up 3 channels and a window that looked out onto the empty parking lot. I fell asleep around 10:30, exhausted from the long drive. The sound woke me just after midnight. At first, I thought I was dreaming. It was such a strange sound, rhythmic, shuffling like hundreds of feet moving in unison. I lay there in the dark, disoriented, trying to place it. Then I realized it was coming from outside. I got up and went to the window. The main street of the town was filled with people, not walking normally, not talking or calling out, just moving in complete silence, all headed in the same direction, toward the tree line at the far end of town. They moved like a procession, like a funeral march, except there was no body, no hearse, nothing to indicate purpose. I could see whole families. A man in pajamas walking next to a woman in a nightgown, a child between them holding each of their hands, an elderly couple in robes, a teenager in basketball shorts, everyone in night clothes, everyone barefoot, everyone staring straight ahead. I counted at least 50 people, maybe more. In a town this small, it had to be nearly everyone. I watched them disappear into the darkness beyond the streetlights, swallowed by the trees. Then the town was silent again. I stood at that window for 20 minutes waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about those faces, blank, empty, like they were sleepwalking, like they didn't know what they were doing. The next morning, I went to the diner for breakfast. It was busy, nearly every table full. I recognized some of the faces from the night before. The man in pajamas was now in work clothes, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. The teenager was at the counter, eating pancakes and scrolling through his phone. They all looked perfectly normal. I ordered eggs and toast, trying to decide if I should say anything. Finally, I turned to the woman at the table next to mine. "Excuse me," I said. "Did something happen in town last night?" She looked at me blankly. "Happen?" "I saw a lot of people walking around midnight toward the woods." The diner went quiet. Everyone was looking at me now. Not hostile exactly, but focused, alert. "You must have been dreaming," the woman said carefully. "Nothing happened last night." I wasn't dreaming. I saw at least 50 people. "You were dreaming," she repeated, firmer this time. A man at the counter, the one who'd been in pajamas, stood up. He walked over to my table and sat down across from me without asking. Up close, I could see how tired he looked. Dark circles under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth. "Let me give you some advice," he said quietly. "Eat your breakfast. Pick up your car. Get back on the highway. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. I just want to know what I saw." "No," he said, "you don't." He stood up and left money on the counter. As he walked past my table, he leaned down and whispered, "If you're smart, you'll leave before tonight." I finished my breakfast in silence. No one else spoke to me. When I left, I could feel their eyes following me to the door. I went to the garage. The mechanic had my car ready, and I paid him without making small talk. I got in, started the engine and headed for the highway, but I couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said. "If you're smart, You'll leave before tonight. What happened at night? I made it about 5 miles out of town before I turned around. I don't know why I did it. Curiosity maybe, or stubbornness. But I went back, parked behind an abandoned building at the edge of town and waited for sunset. As it got dark, I walked to a position where I could see the main street but stay hidden. Then I waited. At exactly midnight, they came out again. Every door in town opened simultaneously. People filed out in their night clothes, forming the same silent procession. Young, old, families, singles, everyone. They moved with that same blank expression, that same mechanical purpose. This time I followed them. I stayed far back, moving from shadow to shadow, keeping to the tree line. The procession wound through the woods along a path that looked well worn. We walked for maybe 20 minutes before I saw the clearing ahead. It was a large open space ringed by stones. In the center was something that looked like an altar, a flat rock about waist-high, stained dark in the moonlight. The townspeople formed a circle around it and stopped. They just stood there, waiting. I crouched behind a fallen log, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. They stood there for over an hour. No one moved, no one spoke. They just waited, staring at the altar. Finally, as if responding to some signal I couldn't perceive, they turned around and walked back. I waited until they were gone before I approached the clearing. Up close, I could see that the altar stone was covered in scratches, marks and symbols carved deep into the rock. Some looked old, weathered by time. Others looked recent, and the stains weren't rust. I heard a sound behind me and spun around. Claire from the motel was standing at the edge of the clearing, still in her nightgown, still with that blank expression. But her eyes were open now, aware. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "What is this place? What are you all doing?" "Waiting," she said simply. "For what?" She smiled, and it was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. "We don't know anymore. It's been so long I don't think anyone remembers. But we can't stop. If we stop, something worse happens." "What could be worse than this?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked back into the woods. I ran. I didn't go back to the motel for my things. I got in my car and drove until I hit a city with lights and traffic and people who looked at their phones instead of walking into the woods at midnight. I've tried to find information about that town. The name was Ashford or Ashbury and something like that, but I can't find it on any map. When I search for it online, nothing comes up. It's like the place doesn't exist. But I know it does, and I know they're still there. Still walking into those woods every night. Still standing around that altar, waiting for something they can't even name anymore. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed. If I'd still been in that motel room when midnight came. Would I have walked out with them? Would I have known I was doing it? I don't drive through rural Nebraska anymore. I take the long way, even if it adds hours to the trip, because I'm terrified that one night I'll find myself on that highway again, that my car will break down again, that I'll end up in a town with one motel and a diner and people who all know the same terrible secret, and that this time, I won't leave before midnight. Story 4. Harlow's Traditions. I met Jordan at a coffee shop in Portland, and within 3 months I knew I was going to marry him. He was funny and kind and had this way of making everyone around him feel comfortable. His family, he said, lived in a small town called Harlow, about 2 hours east. He'd grown up there, and from the way he described it, all harvest festivals and church suppers and everyone knowing everyone, it sounded like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting. When he invited me to visit for Thanksgiving, I was excited. Meeting the parents was a big step, and I wanted to make a good impression. We drove out on a Wednesday afternoon in November. Harlow appeared suddenly after miles of farmland and forest. a cluster of old houses and brick buildings that looked frozen in time. There was a town square with a gazebo, a church with a white steeple, and streets lined with trees that had already dropped their leaves. "It's charming," I said honestly. Jordan smiled, but there was something tight around his eyes. "Yeah, it's definitely unique." His parents lived in a Victorian house on the main street. His mother, Patricia, met us at the door with a hug that lasted a beat too long. She was a tall woman in her 50s with sharp features and an appraising look that made me feel like I was being catalogued. "Amber," she said warmly, "we've heard so much about you. Come in, come in." His father, Richard, was quieter but equally welcoming. Over dinner that night, a feast of roasted chicken and vegetables that must have taken hours to prepare, they asked me about my job, my family, my interests. Normal parent questions, except for the way Patricia studied me while I answered like she was looking for something specific. After dinner, she asked if I'd help her with dishes. In the kitchen, while Jordan and his father talked in the living room, she took my hands in hers. "May I?" she asked, turning my hands over to examine my palms. I laughed nervously. "Are you going to read my fortune?" "Something like that." She traced the lines on my palm with one finger, her expression serious. "Good bone structure, strong hands. You're healthy?" Yes." "Family history? Any chronic illnesses I should know about?" The question was so odd, so clinical that I pulled my hands back. "Why would you need to know that?" She smiled. "Just a mother's curiosity. I want to make sure Jordan chooses well." That night I asked Jordan about it. We were in his childhood bedroom, a space that felt strangely impersonal for someone who'd lived there for 18 years. No posters, no sports trophies, nothing that indicated what kind of kid he'd been. "Your mom asked about my medical history," I said. "It was kind of weird." He sighed. "Yeah, she does that small town thing. Everyone's very invested in everyone else's business." It felt like more than that. He was quiet for a long moment. "Harlow has traditions. Some of them are old-fashioned. My mom takes them seriously. Just ignore it." But I couldn't ignore it. Over the next 2 days, I noticed things. The way people in town looked at me when we went for walks. Not unfriendly exactly, but evaluating. Like they were measuring me against some invisible standard. The way conversations would stop when I entered a room, then resume in a slightly different key. The way Jordan's mother kept finding excuses to touch me, adjusting my collar, brushing hair from my face, commenting on my complexion. On Friday afternoon, Patricia asked if I wanted to see the family library. The room was in the basement, lined with shelves that held books dating back a century or more. Most were about local history, genealogy, farming techniques. "Jordan comes from a very old family," Patricia said, running her hand along the spines. "The Harlow name goes back to the town's founding. It's important to us that the line continues properly." "That's nice," I said, unsure how to respond. "We have standards," she continued. "Not everyone is suitable, but you." She turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're exactly what we've been hoping for." I left the library feeling cold despite the warmth of the house. That night I woke around 2 in the morning to find Jordan gone from the bed. I went looking for him and found him downstairs in the kitchen with his parents. They were speaking in low voices, and I caught fragments of the conversation from the hallway. "She's perfect," Patricia was saying. "The right age, healthy, no genetic complications." "I'm not sure about this," Jordan said, and my heart clenched at the distress in his voice. "Maybe we should wait." "We've waited long enough," Richard said firmly. "The cycle can't be broken. You know what happens if it is." "But she doesn't understand." "She will. When the time comes, she'll understand. They always do." I crept back upstairs, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to pack my bag and leave, but it was the middle of the night and we were miles from anywhere. I'd have to wait until morning. I didn't sleep. When Jordan came back to bed an hour later, I pretended to be asleep. The next morning, I told him I wasn't feeling well and asked if we could cut the visit short. He agreed immediately, almost with relief, but when we tried to leave, Patricia stopped us at the door. "You can't go yet," she said. "The festival is tonight. Everyone's expecting to see you." "What festival?" I asked. "The harvest celebration. It's tradition. The whole town will be there." Jordan looked at me helplessly. "We really should stay just for a few hours, then we'll go." Against my better judgment, I agreed. The festival was held in a barn at the edge of town. When we arrived, it was already crowded. Long tables were set up with food, and a band played folk music in the corner. Everyone greeted us like we were guests of honor, pressing drinks into our hands, asking me questions, touching my arm, my hair, my hands. Patricia appeared at my elbow. "Come with me. There's someone you should meet." She led me through the crowd to a group of older women standing near the back of the barn. They looked at me with the same appraising expression I'd seen on Patricia's face. "This is Eleanor," Patricia said, introducing me to the eldest of them. "She's our town historian." Eleanor took both my hands in hers. Her skin was dry and papery, and studied my face. "Yes," she said finally. "She'll do nicely." "Do for what?" I asked, trying to pull away. "The preservation," Eleanor said simply. "Harlow has existed for 200 years because we've been careful. We maintain the bloodlines. We ensure continuity. Every generation, each founding family must contribute." "Contribute what?" "A vessel," she said. "Someone to carry on the line." The room seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about?" Patricia's hand closed on my shoulder. "You've been chosen, Amber. It's an honor. You'll become part of something much larger than yourself." I jerked away from her. "I'm leaving. Now." I pushed through the crowd, looking for Jordan. I found him near the entrance, blocked by his father and two other men. "Let me out," I said. Jordan's face was anguished. "Amber, please, just listen. Let me out!" The barn had gone quiet. Everyone was watching us now, waiting. Richard stepped forward. "You can leave if you want. We won't stop you, but understand that if you do, Jordan will have to fulfill his obligation some other way. And the consequences for his failure will fall on him." "What consequences?" I demanded. No one answered. I looked at Jordan, really looked at him, and I saw the fear in his eyes. The resignation, the trap he'd been born into. "Come with me," I said. "We'll leave together. Right now." He shook his head slowly. "I can't. You don't understand. This town, what it is, I can't leave. No one can. We're bound here." "That's insane." "Maybe, but it's true. I could have run. Part of me wanted to. But I looked at the faces surrounding us, all those people watching with patient, expectant expressions. And I realized they weren't going to let me leave. Not really. One way or another, I was part of this now. I found my keys in my pocket, my phone. I ran for the door. They didn't chase me, they just watched. I made it to my car, started the engine, and drove. I drove for 2 hours straight, crying, shaking, not stopping until I was back in Portland. Jordan called me 3 times that night. I didn't answer. He left voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. In the final one, his voice was hollow. "I'm sorry, I wanted to warn you. I thought maybe if you saw it yourself, you'd understand. They've been doing this for generations. They choose outsiders, bring them in, and I don't know what happens to the ones who refuse. They don't talk about it. But I know it's not good. I'm sorry, Amber. I'm so sorry." I blocked his number after that. 6 months later, I heard through a mutual friend that Jordan had married someone else, a woman from a neighboring town. The wedding was in Harlow, I think about that night a lot, about what Patricia meant by preservation, about what would have happened if I'd stayed. Sometimes I wonder if Jordan tried to warn other women before me, if I was just the latest in a long line of people brought to that town, evaluated, selected. And sometimes, late at night, I think about what Richard said. The consequences for his failure will fall on him. I wonder what Jordan had to do to appease them after I left. I wonder if the woman he married understood what she was agreeing to. And I wonder how many other towns like Harlow exist. Small, isolated places with old families and older traditions, places where outsiders are always welcome, as long as they're willing to stay forever. Story 5. The Librarian's Warning. The job listing was perfect. 6 weeks of summer work cataloging historical documents in a small town called Riverside, with pay that was generous for archival work and housing included. I was a graduate student working on my thesis about industrial labor in the early 20th century, and the town's mill history made it an ideal research opportunity. I arrived on a Sunday in late June. The apartment above the library was small but clean, and the librarian, a woman named Judith who must have been pushing 70, helped me carry my bags up the narrow stairs. "You'll start tomorrow morning," she said, slightly out of breath from the climb. 8 o'clock sharp. I'll show you the archive room and explain the filing system." "Sounds good." She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "Few rules you should know. Library closes at 5 and I lock up promptly. You're welcome to keep working, but I can't stay past that. My knees, you understand?" "That's fine. I'm usually done by then anyway." "Good." She looked at me seriously. "Don't stay past 5. It's important." "Okay," I said, confused by her emphasis. "And the folders marked with red tape. Don't open those. They're not part of your project." "What are they?" "Town records that haven't been properly archived yet. Just leave them alone." She left before I could ask anything else. The work was exactly what I'd expected. Dusty boxes of papers, handwritten ledgers, fragile documents that needed careful handling. The mill had closed in the 1950s, and the records dated back to its founding in 1890. I spent the first week photographing payroll documents and making notes on labor conditions. Judith checked on me every few hours, always glancing at the clock, always reminding me to leave before 5. By the end of the first week, her warnings had become almost ritualistic. "You're doing good work," she'd say. "But remember, 5 o'clock, not a minute later." I followed her rules without question until the second week, when I found the first mention of the fire. It was in a newspaper clipping from 1952 tucked between payroll sheets. The headline read, "Mill Fire Claims 23 Lives, Investigation Ongoing." I pulled up the clipping carefully and read the brief article. A fire had broken out on the night shift, trapping workers on the upper floors. The cause was listed as undetermined, and the article mentioned that an investigation was underway. I asked Judith about it that afternoon. Her expression closed immediately. "That was a long time ago." "I know, but I'd like to include it in my research if there are records." "There aren't." "But surely there must be something. Investigation reports, insurance claims." "There aren't," she repeated firmly. "The mill burned. People died. That's all anyone needs to know." "I'm just trying to understand the history." "Some history is better left alone." She stood up from her desk. "It's 4:30. You should pack up for the day." I didn't argue, but I was frustrated. A tragedy like that would be a significant part of the mill's history. Why would the town not want it documented? That night I couldn't stop thinking about the fire. 23 people, an entire night shift, gone. The next day I noticed something I'd missed before. In the back of the archive room there was a filing cabinet I'd been told was off limits. On several drawers, red tape marked the edges. Judith was at lunch. The library was empty except for me. I opened the first drawer. Inside were folders thick with documents. I pulled out the first one and opened it on the table. They were investigation reports from the fire, witness statements, medical examiner notes, photographs. The photos were horrific. Charred bodies, collapsed beams, the interior of the mill reduced to blackened ruins. But it was the witness statements that made my hands start shaking. The doors were locked from the outside. We couldn't get out. Someone barred the exits. I heard them doing it. They wanted us to burn. They planned it. I saw management watching from across the street. They were just standing there, watching. Statement after statement, all telling the same story. The fire hadn't been an accident. It had been deliberate. The workers had been locked inside. I flipped through the investigation report. The official conclusion was listed as accidental electrical fire, no evidence of foul play. But the detective's personal notes, scribbled in the margins, told a different story. Witnesses are consistent. Physical evidence supports locked doors, but pressure from town leadership to close case. No arrests recommended. I sat back, stunned. 23 people had been murdered, and the town had covered it up. I kept reading. There were more documents, financial records showing insurance payouts to mill owners, property transfers, deeds. The mill land had been sold to a development company owned by the same families who'd owned the mill. Those families still lived in Riverside. Their names were on streets, on the library's donation plaques, on the town hall. The entire town had been built on a lie. I was so absorbed that I didn't notice the time until I heard the click of heels on the wooden floor. Judith stood in the doorway of the archive room. Her face was white. "I told you not to open those," she said. "This was a murder," I said. 23 people were killed. I know what happened. Then why isn't it public record? Why are you hiding it? She came into the room slowly and closed the door behind her. Because some truths destroy more than they reveal. This town has lived with what happened for 70 years. The families who did it are still here, their children, their grandchildren. Do you think exposing it now will bring justice? It would bring acknowledgement. Those people deserve to be remembered. They are remembered. Every single one, we just don't talk about it. She gestured to the folders. These records exist, they're preserved. But they're not meant to be shared. That's not your decision to make. Her expression hardened. It's 5:30, you need to leave, now. What happens at 5:30? Please, she said, and for the first time I heard genuine fear in her voice. Just go. I started to argue, but the look on her face stopped me. I put the folders back, gathered my things, and left. From my apartment above the library, I could hear Judith locking up below. Then her car started and drove away. I sat by the window watching the street. The sun was setting, casting long shadows. The town looked peaceful, normal. Around 6:30, I saw them. People walking toward the library. A lot of people. They moved with purpose, gathering in front of the building below. I recognized some of them from around town. The grocery store manager, the woman who ran the diner, the pharmacist. They stood there, looking up at the windows of the archive room, just standing, waiting. I stayed away from the window, heart pounding. They remained there for over an hour, not speaking, not moving, just watching. Finally, as darkness fell, they dispersed. Slowly, one by one, they walked away. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Judith was already at her desk when I came downstairs. She looked exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. "I should have explained better. The fire, what happened? It's an open wound in this town. The families involved, they're powerful. They don't like people asking questions. Those people last night, they were making sure you understood the boundaries." She met my eyes. "You can finish your work here. The payroll records, the labor conditions, the mill's history up until 1952, it's all yours. But leave the fire alone, for your own safety. Are you threatening me? I'm trying to protect you. There's a difference. I wanted to argue. I wanted to take everything I'd found and publish it, expose what this town had hidden for decades. But I looked at Judith's tired, frightened face, and I understood. She'd been keeping those records, preserving them, waiting for a time when it would be safe to share them. But that time hadn't come yet. Maybe it never would. I finished my summer work without incident. I cataloged the documents I was supposed to catalog. I wrote my thesis on labor conditions, and I left Riverside at the end of August. I never mentioned the fire in my research, but I kept copies of everything I'd found that day. Photographs of the documents, the witness statements, the evidence of what really happened. Someday, when enough time has passed, when the families responsible are no longer around to bury the truth, I'll publish it. I'll make sure those 23 people are remembered properly. Until then, I keep the files locked in a safe deposit box, and I try not to think about the people standing in the street that night, watching, waiting, making sure I knew my place. Story 6, The Boy Who Waved Back. We bought the farmhouse in late March, drawn by the promise of space and quiet after years of cramped city apartments. The property was 10 acres, most of it wooded, with a 2-story house that needed work but had good bones. My husband Quinn saw potential. I saw a project that would take years. Our 6-year-old son Caleb saw adventure. The nearest town was 15 miles away, a place so small it didn't show up on GPS. When we mentioned the property address to the real estate agent, she'd hesitated just long enough to make me uneasy before pasting on a smile and saying it was a lovely area. We moved in on a Saturday. By Sunday afternoon, Caleb had found a friend. I was unpacking boxes in the kitchen when he ran in, breathless with excitement. "Mom, there's a boy in the woods. He waved at me." I looked out the window. Our backyard stretched about 100 feet before giving way to dense forest. I didn't see anyone. "Where?" "Right there, at the edge. See?" Caleb pointed. I saw nothing but trees and shadows. "Maybe it was a deer or something, honey." "It wasn't a deer, it was a boy. He was wearing a red shirt." "Well, he probably lives nearby. Maybe you'll see him again." Over the next few days, Caleb talked about the boy constantly. He'd seen him again that evening, standing in the same spot, and again the next morning. The boy never came closer, never called out. He just stood at the tree line and waved. "Why doesn't he come play?" Caleb asked on Wednesday. "Maybe he's shy. Why don't you wave back and see what happens?" That afternoon, I watched from the kitchen as Caleb went into the backyard. He stood near the fence and looked toward the woods. After a moment, he raised his hand and waved. I couldn't see anyone waving back, but Caleb grinned and came running inside. "He waved back. I think he wants me to come play." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "You don't go into those woods without Dad or me, understand?" He nodded, but I could see the disappointment on his face. That weekend, Quinn was fixing a section of fence when our nearest neighbor, a man named Ray who lived about a mile up the road, stopped by to introduce himself. He was probably in his 60s, weathered and lean, with the kind of face that suggested a lifetime of outdoor work. "Heard you folks bought the old Pritchard place," he said, accepting the beer Quinn offered. "How you settling in?" "Pretty well," Quinn said. "It's quiet. Caleb loves having space to run around." "That's good. Kids need space." Ray took a long drink, then asked carefully, "He seen anything unusual out here?" Quinn and I exchanged glances. "Like what?" I asked. "Oh, just wildlife. Deer, maybe coyotes. They can spook city folks sometimes." "He's been talking about seeing another boy," Quinn said, "in the woods. We figured it was his imagination or maybe a trick of the light." Ray's expression went very still. "What does this boy look like?" "He said red shirt, but honestly, I haven't seen anyone." I tried to laugh. "You know how kids are, probably an imaginary friend." Ray set down his beer. "What I'm about to tell you might sound strange, but I want you to listen carefully. If your boy says he sees someone in those woods, you keep him away from them. Far away. Don't let him go near the tree line, and for God's sake, don't let him go into the forest." "Why?" Quinn asked. "What's out there?" Ray was quiet for a long moment. "There was a family that lived here before the Pritchards, back in the 70s, the Hendersons. They had a boy about your son's age. One day the kid disappeared. They searched for weeks. State police, volunteers, search dogs, nothing. Never found a trace. My stomach went cold. What happened to him? No one knows, but after the Hendersons moved away, other families tried living here. Never lasted long. Always problems. Kids seeing things, kids wanting to go into the woods. One family lost their daughter for 3 days. She wandered back on her own, wouldn't talk about where she'd been. They moved out that same week. You're saying our house is haunted?" Quinn's tone was skeptical. "I'm saying that whatever is in those woods, it's interested in children, and every family with kids that's lived here has had problems. The Pritchards didn't have children, so they were fine. But you folks..." He looked toward the house where Caleb was visible through the window. "Just be careful. Keep him close." After Ray left, Quinn and I had a long discussion. He thought Ray was either superstitious or trying to scare the city people. I wasn't so sure. There had been something in Ray's eyes when he talked about the Henderson boy. Something haunted. We decided to keep a closer watch on Caleb just in case. But Caleb became obsessed with the boy in the woods. Every day he'd look out the window watching for him. He started having conversations with his friend, standing in the backyard and talking to empty air. When we asked what they talked about, he'd just say, "Stuff." Then one morning I found him standing at the back door before dawn, fully dressed. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice sharp with sleep and sudden fear. "He wants to show me something." "Who does?" "My friend. He says there's something cool in the woods. He wants me to see it." I pulled him away from the door. "Caleb, listen to me. You are not going into those woods, do you understand?" "But he really wants me to come. He keeps asking." "I don't care. You stay out of the woods." He cried then, huge heaving sobs that broke my heart. But I didn't relent. The next week, things escalated. I'd find Caleb standing at the tree line when I'd specifically told him to play in the front yard. He'd be staring into the forest, not moving, like he was listening to something. When I'd call him, he'd turn back slowly, reluctantly. "He says I'm his friend," Caleb told me once. "He says he's lonely. He wants me to play with him." "What does he look like?" I asked. "Can you describe him?" Caleb thought for a moment. "I don't know. I can't really see his face, but he's nice. He makes me feel good." That terrified me more than anything else. We tried everything. We made the backyard off limits. We filled Caleb's days with activities, playdates with kids from his new school, anything to distract him. But every evening he'd gravitate to the windows facing the woods, watching, waiting. Quinn wanted to build a fence, something tall enough that Caleb couldn't see the forest. But before we could start, something happened that changed everything. I woke up at 3 in the morning and knew immediately that something was wrong. Call it mother's instinct. I ran to Caleb's room. His bed was empty. The back door was wide open. I screamed for Quinn, and we both ran outside with flashlights. The yard was empty, but I could see small footprints in the dew-wet grass leading toward the woods. "Caleb!" I shouted. Quinn was already running. We crashed into the forest, sweeping our lights frantically. Trees pressed in from all sides, and the darkness was absolute beyond our flashlight beams. We searched for 20 minutes, calling his name, hearing nothing but silence and our own panicked breathing. Then Quinn's light caught something red ahead. We ran toward it and found Caleb standing in a small clearing, just standing there in his pajamas, barefoot, staring at something we couldn't see. "Caleb!" I grabbed him, pulling him against me. His skin was ice cold. "What are you doing out here?" He blinked slowly, like he was waking up. "I was playing." "With who?" "My friend." He pointed at the trees ahead. "He brought me here. He wanted to show me where he lives." I swept my flashlight across the clearing and stopped. There was a tree at the far edge, massive and ancient. Carved into the trunk at child height were dozens of names. Some were weathered and faint, barely visible. Others looked recent. I walked closer, my heart hammering. Henderson Daniel, 1974, was carved near the bottom. Above it, Morrison, Lily, 1988. Chen, Marcus, 1995. Foster, Emma, 2003. The most recent one was dated just 3 years ago. There were at least 20 names, maybe more, hidden in the bark's rough texture. "We're leaving," Quinn said. His voice was shaking. "Right now. Tonight." We half-carried Caleb back to the house. He was compliant but distant, like he wasn't fully present. We packed everything we could fit in the car in 30 minutes and drove away in the dark. We stayed in a motel that night. Quinn called Ray the next morning. "You found the tree," Ray said when Quinn described what we'd seen. "What is that place? What are those names?" "Children," Ray said quietly. "Every child who's gone into those woods and never come back, or the ones who came back different, changed. The families that stayed carved their children's names into that tree. I don't know why. Memorial, maybe? Or warning. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me?" Quinn didn't answer. We never went back to the farmhouse. We called the real estate agent and told her we'd had a family emergency and needed to sell immediately. She didn't ask questions. I think she knew. The house sold 3 months later to a retired couple in their 70s. No children. Caleb doesn't remember much about that night in the woods. He says he remembers a boy in a red shirt who wanted to be friends. He remembers feeling happy. He doesn't remember walking outside or standing in that clearing. He's 9 now, and we live in a suburb with neighbors on all sides and streetlights that stay on all night. No woods, no isolated properties, no shadows that wave back. But sometimes in the early evening I catch Caleb staring out his bedroom window with an expression I can't quite read. Like he's looking for something, like he's listening for something calling from far away. And I remember what Ray said before we left. The ones who go into those woods, even if they come back, they're never completely the same. Part of them stays out there, part of them is always listening. I watch my son and I wonder what he hears in the quiet moments. I wonder what's still calling to him from those dark trees. And I wonder if we got him out in time, or if we just delayed something that was always going to happen. Story 7. Fuel stop. I'd been driving for 6 hours when the fuel light came on. That angry orange glow that meant I had maybe 20 miles before I was stranded. The highway had been empty for the last hour, just flat plains and distant mountains under a sky going orange with sunset. The town appeared like something out of a time capsule. Wood-paneled gas station, analog pumps with those old mechanical numbers. A diner with chrome trim and neon signage that said Betty's. Buildings that looked like they'd been frozen in the mid-70s and never bothered to update. I pulled up to a pump, grateful despite the oddness. Better outdated than nothing. The attendant came out to meet me, a kid who couldn't have been more than 20, wearing a uniform that looked vintage, like actually old, not retro. Faded and worn in places that suggested decades of use. "Fill it up?" he asked. "Please." He started pumping and I went inside to use the bathroom and grab snacks. The interior was exactly what I'd expected. Wood paneling, yellowed photographs on the walls showing the town in what I assumed were its heyday. A radio played music that sounded like it was from the 70s. Not a throwback station, but actual recordings with the scratchy quality of old vinyl. When I came back out, the attendant was finishing up. $32, he said. I handed him my card. He looked at it blankly. We don't take those. Credit cards? Just cash. Of course. I dug through my wallet and found two 20s. He took them and went inside for change. While I waited, I noticed how quiet it was. No traffic sounds from the highway. No wind. Just an eerie, heavy silence that made my ears ring. The attendant came back with my change. You looking to stay the night? Betty's got rooms upstairs. No, I'm good. Got a few more hours of driving left. He nodded, but didn't move away from the car. You should eat first. Food's good and you don't want to drive on an empty stomach. Betty makes a great meatloaf. There was something about the way he said it. Not quite a suggestion, more like gentle insistence, but that made me uncomfortable. I appreciate it, but I really need to get going. Won't take long. Diner's right there. He gestured across the street. Everybody eats at Betty's. I looked where he pointed and saw that the diner was, in fact, full of people. Every booth seemed occupied, which was strange for a town this small, this isolated. Maybe just something quick, I heard myself say. The kid smiled. Good choice. I crossed the street, telling myself I was being paranoid. Free country. People were allowed to recommend restaurants. Inside, the diner was warm and bright. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floor, a jukebox in the corner playing something that sounded like the Bee Gees. People looked up when I entered, and several smiled and nodded like they knew me. A waitress, probably in her 50s, name tag reading Betty, approached with a menu and a smile that was a little too wide. Welcome, hun. Sit anywhere you like. I chose a booth near the door. The menu was simple. Classic American diner food, all of it sounding good despite my unease. I ordered a burger and fries, thinking I'd eat quickly and leave. While I waited, I looked around. The people in the diner were all ages. Families with kids, elderly couples, people my age sitting alone or in small groups. They talked and laughed and ate like this was any normal evening in any normal town. Except their clothes were wrong. Not drastically, not like costumes, but subtly off. The cuts were dated. The fabrics looked like they were from another era. A man in the corner booth wore bell-bottoms and a patterned shirt that would have fit perfectly in 1975. A woman 2 booths over had hair styled in that feathered way that had been popular in the late 70s. And no one had a cell phone. Not one person in the entire diner. My food arrived quickly. Betty set it down with that same too wide smile. You just passing through or thinking about staying? Passing through. That's a shame. It's a nice town. Quiet, safe. Good people. She refilled my coffee without asking. You look tired. Long drive? Yeah, pretty long. We have rooms upstairs, clean, comfortable, $50 for the night, breakfast included. I really can't. Most people who stop here end up staying, she said, and something in her tone made it sound less like observation and more like warning. Roads get dangerous at night. Lots of curves, no lights. Easy to miss your turn. I'll be careful. She smiled and walked away. I ate faster than I normally would, suddenly desperate to leave. But when I tried to pay, Betty waved me off. First meals on the house, town tradition for travelers. I couldn't. I insist. She was already clearing my plate. You come back anytime. I left the diner feeling rattled. Something was deeply wrong with this place, but I couldn't articulate what. It just felt off, like a movie set. Like everything was a little too perfect, a little too staged. I got to my car and turned the key. Nothing. I tried again. The engine didn't even turn over, no sound at all. The attendant materialized beside my window. Having trouble? It won't start. Pop the hood. Let me take a look. He spent 5 minutes examining the engine, then shook his head. Alternator's dead. I can fix it, but I'll need to order the part. Won't get here until tomorrow. Tomorrow, can't you? Closed Sundays. Part won't come in until Monday morning at the earliest. I wanted to argue, but what could I say? I knew nothing about cars. There's a mechanic in the next town, I tried. Maybe I could get it towed. Next town's 40 miles. Tow truck won't come out here this late. You're better off staying the night. He wiped his hands on his coveralls. Betty's got rooms. She'll take good care of you. I looked at the diner, at the warm light spilling onto the street, at the people inside laughing and eating. I looked at my dead car. I had no choice. Betty gave me a room on the second floor above the diner. It was exactly what she'd promised. Clean, comfortable, decorated in a style that matched the rest of the town. Floral wallpaper, a bed with a quilted coverlet, a TV that only got 3 channels, all showing programs I vaguely recognized from late-night reruns. I tried calling for a tow truck on my cell phone. No service. I tried searching for information about the town. No service. I was completely cut off. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing footsteps in the hallway, soft conversations outside my door, the creak of floorboards. Around 3 in the morning, I went to the window and looked down at the street. Every light in every building was on. People moved between the diner and the gas station and the other buildings. At 3 in the morning, this town was wide awake. The next morning, Betty made me breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast, fresh coffee. She sat with me while I ate, asking questions about where I was from, where I was going, what I did for work. I answered vaguely, increasingly desperate to leave. The part for your car should be in tomorrow, she said. Shane will have you fixed up by noon. Tomorrow? My voice cracked. He said Monday morning. Tomorrow is Monday, hun. I stared at her. Today is Sunday. She smiled. Today is Monday. You've been here 2 days. I thought about that. Arriving Saturday evening, sleeping one night. I've been here 1 day. 2, she repeated gently. You got here Saturday evening. Today is Monday. I wanted to argue, but when I checked my phone, no service, but the date still showed. It confirmed what she was saying. Monday. I'd lost a day. The part didn't come in Monday. Shane apologized, said there was a delay, maybe Wednesday. Betty offered me another night at the same rate. I walked around the town that afternoon trying to find someone who could help. But everyone I talked to gave me the same placid smile, the same gentle assurances. The part would come. Shane would fix my car. I should relax and enjoy the town's hospitality. On Tuesday, I found the newspaper archive in the library. Old issues going back decades. I flipped through them looking for anything that would explain this place. I found an article from 1978 about a traveler who'd stopped in town and decided to stay. There was a photo of her, a woman in her 30s smiling, standing in front of the diner. Her name was listed as Carol. I found her that evening working as a waitress alongside Betty. She looked exactly the same as in the photograph. Hadn't aged a day in 45 years. Carol? I approached carefully. She turned with that familiar smile. That's right. What can I get you, hun? How long have you worked here? Oh, long time. I came through back in... well, it's been a while. 1978? Her smile didn't waver. Sounds about right. You don't look old enough. Good genes, she laughed. You thinking of staying? Town could use someone like you. We've got work if you're interested. I need to leave. My car. Shane will have it fixed soon. Until then, just enjoy yourself. We're happy to have you. That night, I tried to leave on foot. I walked for 3 hours down the dark highway, following the road I'd driven in on. At dawn, I found myself back at the town limits, like I'd walked in a circle, like the road itself had curved around and brought me back. I've stopped trying to leave now. It's been 3 weeks, or maybe 3 months. Time moves strangely here. Days blend together. Betty gave me a job at the diner. People call me by a name that isn't mine. Susan. And I've stopped correcting them. It's easier that way. My car is still at the gas station. Shane says he's waiting for a part. He's been waiting for the same part for years, I think. Sometimes new people come through. Lost travelers looking for gas or food. I smile at them. I recommend the meatloaf. I tell them Betty has rooms upstairs. Most of them stay. The ones who try to leave, well, the road always brings them back. It brought me back. I think about the woman in the 1978 photograph sometimes, Carol, who came through and never left. I wonder if she remembers her real name. I wonder if she remembers wanting to leave. I wonder how long until I forget mine. Story 8. What happens after the festival? I wasn't planning to stop in Coldwell. It was one of those accidents of timing. Running late, taking a wrong turn, ending up on a back road as the sun was setting. When I saw the lights ahead, strung between buildings like something out of a holiday movie, I thought I'd stumbled onto something magical. The town square was packed with people. Families walked between booths selling crafts and baked goods. A bonfire blazed in the center of the square, surrounded by people roasting marshmallows and laughing. Music played from speakers hidden somewhere, something folksy and warm. A banner strung across the street read, "Coldwell Founders Day, celebrating 200 years." I parked and got out, drawn by the warmth and light after hours of lonely driving. A woman approached immediately, holding out a cup of steaming cider. "Welcome," she said brightly. "You're just in time." "Time for what?" "The celebration. Last night of Founders Day. You picked the perfect time to visit." She pressed the cup into my hands. "I'm Christine, mayor of our little town." The cider was delicious, spiced and sweet. I sipped it while Christine told me about the festival's history, about the town's founding in 1824, about the traditions they'd maintained for 2 centuries. "You should stay," she said. "There's dancing later, and the bonfire ceremony at midnight. You don't want to miss that." I should have left, should have thanked her for the cider and gotten back on the highway. But there was something about the atmosphere, the laughter, the music, the genuine warmth of the people that made me want to stay. "I don't have anywhere to be until tomorrow," I heard myself say. Christine's smile widened. "Wonderful. Come, let me introduce you around." The next few hours were a blur of friendly faces and good food. People welcomed me like I was an old friend. Strangers offered me cookies, pressed more cider into my hands, asked about my life with genuine interest. I felt embraced by this community in a way I hadn't felt in years in my own city. Around 11, someone started playing a fiddle and people began dancing in the square. I joined in, laughing, spinning with partners whose names I immediately forgot. The whole night had a dreamlike quality, heightened by the cider and the firelight and the sheer joy on everyone's faces. At midnight, a bell rang and everyone gathered around the bonfire. Christine stood at the front, raising her hands for quiet. 200 years ago, she called out, her voice carrying across the square, our founders made a promise. A covenant that would ensure this town's prosperity, safety, and continuity. Every generation since has honored that promise. Tonight, we honor it again. People cheered. The bonfire blazed higher. "And we're grateful," Christine continued, looking directly at me, "for the gifts that allow us to keep our promise." Something in the way she said gifts made my skin prickle. But everyone was applauding, and the moment passed. Someone started singing and the crowd joined in, a song I didn't know in a language I didn't recognize. I felt suddenly dizzy. The cider maybe, or the smoke, or the late hour. I should go, I said to the person next to me. They smiled. Stay a little longer, the best part is coming. But I was already walking toward my car, suddenly desperate to leave. The crowd parted for me, still singing, still smiling. No one stopped me. I got to my car, got in, and drove out of town. In my rearview mirror, I could see the bonfire still blazing, the crowd still gathered. I made it back to the highway and drove for 10 minutes before exhaustion hit me like a wall. I pulled into a rest stop and fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up, it was dawn, and I was parked on a side street in Coldwell. Not at the rest stop, not on the highway. Back in the town I'd left hours ago. I tried to start the car. It worked fine. I drove out again, carefully noting every turn, making sure I was headed the right way. 20 minutes later, I was back in Coldwell. I tried 6 more times that day. Every road led me back. Every turn, no matter how carefully planned, brought me to the same town square. The festival decorations were gone. The booths, the lights, the bonfire, all vanished like they'd never existed. The square was empty, the buildings dark. I knocked on doors, no one answered. I tried the town hall, the shops, the houses. Every door was locked. No, not locked. Locked from the outside. I found heavy chains wrapped around door handles, padlocks securing them, like someone wanted to make sure nothing could get out. My phone still had no service. My car worked but wouldn't take me anywhere except back to Coldwell. On the second day, I explored more systematically. The town was small, maybe 200 houses, a main street with shops and municipal buildings, a church. Everything was neat and well maintained, but completely empty, except for the food left out. On porches, on kitchen tables, visible through windows, on the counter in the diner. Plates of food, some fresh, some rotting. Like people had been interrupted mid-meal and never came back. On the third day, I found the field behind the church. It was a large open space, the grass trampled and dead in places. In the center was a stone structure, not quite an altar, not quite a monument. Something ancient, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The ground around it was dark, stained. I stood at the edge of that field for a long time, trying to understand what I was seeing, trying to understand what happened in Coldwell after the festival ended. Then I heard it, singing, faint, distant, like it was coming from underground. The same song from the bonfire ceremony, in that language I didn't know. I ran. Back to my car, back to the town square. I tried the roads again, desperate, crying, not caring which direction as long as it was away. And suddenly I was out. The road opened ahead of me, clear and normal. I could see the highway in the distance. I drove like I was being chased, not stopping until I was 3 states away. I reported the town to the police, told them about the empty buildings, the locked doors, the field behind the church. They couldn't find it. The coordinates I gave them led to farmland. No town, no buildings, no Coldwell at all. Maybe you were more lost than you thought, the officer said kindly. Easy to get turned around on back roads at night. I knew what I'd seen. I have the photos on my phone. The locked doors, the abandoned plates of food, the field behind the church. But when I look at the photos now, they're fading, like the images are slowly being erased. In another week, I think they'll be gone entirely. I've tried researching Coldwell, Founders' Day celebrations, 200-year anniversaries. Nothing matches. It's like the town doesn't exist, or like it only exists on certain nights, for certain purposes. I think about Christine, about all those friendly people pressing cider into my hands, about the way they'd smiled and called me a gift. I think about what happens after the festival when the lights go down and the people disappear and the doors are locked from the outside. I think about that field behind the church and the stains on the ground and the singing that came from underneath. And I think about how easily I could have stayed, how close I came to staying, how welcome they made me feel, right up until the moment I wasn't. Sometimes late at night I hear that song again, the one they sang at midnight. I don't know the words, but I find myself humming the melody, and I wonder if I really escaped or if part of me is still there, locked behind those chained doors, waiting for the next Founder's Day, waiting to welcome the next guest who stops for just one night in a town that shouldn't exist.